Diana Taurasi sat beneath the blinding lights, shoulders squared, voice steady, but her eyes told a different story. For the first time in 2 decades, the White Mamba looked small, not defeated by injury, not undone by age, but swallowed whole by a truth she could no longer outrun. Cameras clicked like nervous heartbeats as she leaned into the microphone and whispered the words that rippled across the sports world. "I'm retiring." And just like that, an era ended. No victory lap, no farewell tour, no last defiant reminder of who she used to be. It was quiet, too quiet, as if silence itself had stepped into the room and stolen the air from everyone's lungs. But the real shock wasn't that Diana Taurasi retired. The real shock was why she retired. Because behind the press conference smiles, behind the polite applause, behind the neat little video tribute the Mercury rolled out, everyone knew what she didn't dare say. She didn't walk away because the game left her. She walked away because someone else had arrived. Someone who didn't clap back, didn't talk trash, didn't fuel the drama. Someone who simply played basketball so brilliantly, so effortlessly, so undeniably, that she rewrote the league in real time. Caitlin Clark didn't end Diana Taurasi's career with a quote, a feud, or a headline. She ended it with silence. That was the part nobody saw coming. Not the analysts, not the Mercury, not even Diana herself. Because silence is supposed to be peaceful. But Caitlin's silence? It was surgical. It was devastating. It was the kind of silence that doesn't need to announce a takeover. It simply makes one inevitable. And as Diana stared into the cameras, searching for a graceful exit line, she knew the world wasn't watching a legendary player retire. They were watching a legendary player get replaced. Not maliciously, not intentionally, but naturally, as all eras eventually do. Yet the moment hung there, heavy and bittersweet, because the truth was too sharp to say aloud. Caitlin Clark had become the future so quickly, so explosively, that she left no room for hesitation, no room for ego, no room for anyone clinging to the past. But to understand how this moment, this quiet, aching, unforgettable moment, came to be, we have to rewind to the spark that ignited it. Because long before Diana took her final bow, she spoke 3 little words that would come back to haunt her like a prophecy turned inside out. And what happened next left the entire league stunned. To understand why Diana Taurasi's final words felt so hollow, you have to go back to the moment she lit the fuse on a storyline she never imagined would explode in her own direction. April 2024. The WNBA season was still weeks away, but the world was already buzzing with something the league had never experienced. A rookie whose presence felt like an earthquake. Caitlin Clark hadn't even suited up for a professional game yet, and arenas were selling out. Cameras were following her. Kids were copying her shooting form. Entire cities were planning their summers around fever schedules. It wasn't hype. It was history. And then a reporter asked Diana the question heard around the sports universe. What do you think Caitlin should expect entering the league? Diana didn't blink, didn't smile, didn't hide the edge in her voice. She simply said, reality is coming. 3 little words. A veteran's warning. But they carry a weight that cut deeper than she intended, because it didn't sound like mentorship. It sounded like a threat, a declaration, the queen defending her throne. Within minutes, social media turned those words into a rallying cry, not for unity, not for growth, but for gatekeeping. Suddenly, every old-school purist, every bitter contrarian who said women's basketball didn't need change, grabbed onto those words like a shield. Reality is coming, they tweeted. The kid's about to get humbled, they posted. It was a line in the sand, drawn not in chalk, but in ego. But here's the twist Diana didn't see coming. Caitlin wasn't the enemy of the league. She was the reason millions of new fans, immigrants, first-generation Americans, young girls searching for their mirror in a sport that rarely offered one, were tuning in. Caitlin represented possibility, not disruption. She represented pride. She represented progress. And she represented a future that didn't ask permission to exist. Yet Diana spoke as if she were addressing an intruder, as if this rising star owed her deference simply because that's how it used to work. But the country heard something else. They heard the frustration of someone who had waited 20 years for the world to appreciate her sport, only to watch a 22-year-old do it in a single season. It wasn't jealousy. It was fear. Fear that the spotlight she had fought for was about to shift. Fear that the story she authored might not be the one people remembered. Fear that the new reality wasn't coming for Caitlin. It was coming for her. And as fans debated, analysts dissected, and headlines multiplied, that quote aged worse by the hour. Because every time Caitlin broke another record, every time she sold out another arena, every time she smiled through pressure that would have crushed lesser players, the question grew louder. Whose reality were we talking about? But this wasn't the end of the tension. Not even close. Because as the season approached and the league braced for impact, the person Diana doubted most would soon rewrite the narrative in a way no one could ignore. And what happened next would flip the entire power dynamic of the WNBA on its head. Before Caitlin Clark ever stepped onto a WNBA floor, before social media turned every highlight into a cultural lightning bolt, there was one name that defined women's basketball: Diana Taurasi. To understand how this saga became the story of a legend being eclipsed by silence, you have to go all the way back to the beginning, to the dusty childhood gyms where a fierce, hungry kid from Chino, California, learned to turn pressure into oxygen. Diana wasn't born into basketball royalty. She built her crown one scraped knee, one late-night shooting session, one impossible shot at a time. The coaches who watched her as a teenager all said the same thing. She wasn't just talented. She was relentless. She treated every game like a statement and every doubter like fuel. By the time she arrived at UConn, she didn't walk into the locker room like a freshman. She walked in like a storm. And Gino Arima knew he wasn't just looking at a player. He was looking at a force of nature. Championships followed. Dominance followed. The WNBA came calling, and Diana answered with a swagger the league had rarely seen. On the Phoenix Mercury, she wasn't just a rookie trying to survive. She became the heartbeat of a franchise desperate for relevance. The White Mamba persona took form, not as a nickname someone handed her, but as a reputation she carved through cold-blooded buzzer beaters, smack talk that sliced opponents in half, and a competitive fire that made even seasoned veterans step aside. For 2 decades, Diana didn't play basketball. She ruled it. She was the queen of the old guard, the final pillar of a generation built on grit rather than Instagram highlights, on bruises instead of brand deals. She survived eras, outlasted stars, and collected rings like souvenirs. When she spoke, the league listened. When she rolled her eyes, rookies shrank. And when she stepped on the court, even the brightest young players felt like they were stepping into a cathedral she built. But no kingdom lasts forever. While Diana stayed the same style, same pace, same ego, the league around her began to evolve. Younger, faster, sharper talent flooded in. The game sped up. The spotlight shifted. And somewhere in that shift, things started slipping through Diana's fingers. Not all at once. Just little signs at first. A missed rotation that she would have nailed a decade ago. A blow-by layup from a rookie whose name she barely knew. A three-pointer that bounced off the rim instead of snapping to the net like it used to. She told herself it was just a bad night, just a cold stretch, just a tired season. But tired seasons became tired years, and the numbers didn't lie. Her shooting percentage dipped. Her defensive impact plummeted. There were nights when the Mercury couldn't hide her anymore. Nights when the cameras caught the frustration in her eyes as younger guards torched her on switches. Her minutes shrank. Quietly at first, then openly. The coaching staff would talk about preserving her body, but everyone in the locker room knew the truth. The wheels were slowing down and the league was speeding past her. Even the fans, the ones who worshiped her for years, started to shift their cheers toward newer faces. Diana could feel it. That subtle chill when a franchise begins preparing for life without you. That sense that the spotlight you once owned now burned a little softer. And yet, the pride never changed. That was the thing about Diana. She wasn't wired for humility or gentle transitions. She didn't know how to fade gracefully. She had spent her entire career as the apex predator of women's basketball, the one who never backed down, never apologized, never gave an inch. So when the world began celebrating fresh faces and rising phenoms, she couldn't help but see it as an invasion of her territory. She clung tighter to persona that made her unstoppable. She doubled down on the Mamba attitude, the bite, the bravado. To her, the new generation wasn't a continuation of her legacy. They were challengers to her throne. And when microphones were placed in front of her, that insecurity slipped through the cracks. Comments came out sharper. Interviews carried a colder edge. The subtext was always the same. I built this league, and I refuse to be replaced. But the league didn't need permission. It was evolving whether she liked it or not. Behind the scenes, whispers turned into conversations. Conversations turned into decisions. The Mercury no longer revolved around her. The WNBA no longer revolved around her. And the fans, especially the millions of new ones, looked right past her toward a rookie from Iowa who played with the kind of joy Diana once had before she became basketball royalty. Diana could feel the walls closing in, but she refused to admit it. She still saw herself as a queen, even as the crown began to slip. That's the tragedy of legends. They rarely see the end coming. And yet, the moment was coming. The moment that would expose everything she tried to hide. The moment that proved the league had officially outgrown its old crown. Caitlin Clark's rise never felt like a typical sports story. It felt like a spark catching fire. Quiet at first, then roaring so loudly the country had no choice but to stop and listen. Long before she was filling WNBA arenas, long before fans wrapped entire road trips around her schedule, she was just a kid from Iowa chasing a feeling. A kid who wanted the ball because it made her feel alive. A kid raised in a household where competition was a love language, where every driveway game became a lesson in toughness. Those early years didn't predict the seismic shift she'd eventually create, but they forged something in her, an instinct to push through, to rise, to never be intimidated by expectations others would crumble under. By the time she stepped onto the court at the University of Iowa, that spark had a pulse. She wasn't just a shooter, she was a phenomenon. People drove hours through cornfields just to squeeze into arenas that were suddenly too small. Games sold out. TV numbers surged, and commentators scrambled for new superlatives because the old ones felt too small for what she was doing. She broke records with a kind of joyful defiance, as if daring the world to keep up. And somehow, even as this tidal wave of attention crashed around her, she remained anchored in the same quiet certainty she'd had as a kid. She didn't chase celebrity. Celebrity found her, yet she played with a pressure most athletes never touch. Not pressure from critics or rivals. Pressure from possibility. Every time she took the floor, millions tuned in. Every shot carried the weight of movement forming around her. Young girls who finally saw themselves in someone fearless. Fans who didn't always feel welcome in sports now finding a home in her orbit. Communities rallying around the idea that brilliance could come from unlikely places. And she handled it all with a calm that felt almost unreal. Her focus stayed razor sharp, her expression unreadable, her composure unshakable. If she ever felt overwhelmed, she didn't show it. There were no dramatic rants, no public meltdowns, no desperate attempts to clap back at doubters. Her silence became a kind of armor. While the world debated, analyzed, and sometimes even weaponized her name, she just kept showing up with the same steady eyes and the same quiet routine. She didn't need to tell anyone who she was. She let the work do that. And the work spoke loudly. It roared through arenas where attendance shattered expectations, through broadcasts where her games pulled numbers once unimaginable for women's sports, through highlight reels that bent the internet to her will. When she walked into the WNBA, she wasn't just another rookie. She was a lightning rod for a cultural shift already in motion. Corporate sponsors lined up, global brands hovered, and fan bases that never agreed on anything suddenly agreed on her. But the pressure of being the face of a new era is heavy. She carried the weight of young fans who saw her as a symbol of possibility, older fans who wanted proof that women's sports deserved their rightful place, and entire communities who saw her ascent as a reflection of their own fight to be seen. She carried legacy, identity, and expectation, all without folding under the weight. What made her rise so magnetic wasn't just talent. It was a contradiction she embodied. She was soft-spoken but electrifying, humble but historic, a competitor who played with fire, yet carried herself with a gentleness that made people feel connected to her. She didn't chase celebrity. It chased her, wrapped itself around her, and still she kept her footing. Every interview revealed the same grounded core. No arrogance, no entitlement, just gratitude and focus. She talked about teammates before herself, effort before fame, community before ego. Even as the media tried to pull her into culture wars and fan debates, she refused to take the bait. That restraint became part of her legend. In a world thirsty for drama, she stayed intentional, proving that stillness could be louder than shouting. And that's what made the next chapter so startling. Because even as Caitlin Clark remained quiet, the world around her grew louder and messier. Voices clashed over her success, over her identity as a white Midwestern superstar stepping into a league rich with black excellence, over her impact on visibility and inclusivity. Arguments erupted not because of anything she said, but because of what she represented to different people. The discourse swelled until it felt too big for any one athlete to contain. Amid all the noise, something deeper began to shift. New fans weren't just watching Caitlin. They were discovering the WNBA's legacy, its pioneers, and its stories that had long deserved more light. Communities that once felt sidelined saw space opening for them. 2. Her rise didn't eclipse the league. It pulled more eyes toward its richness, creating a growing sense that this moment belonged to everyone. But as the spotlight intensified and the noise around her reached a new peak, an unexpected truth emerged, one that would reshape everything that came next. Because the real twist wasn't born from something Caitlin said. It came when she didn't say a word, and the world said it for her. The first time the Indiana Fever walked into a sold-out arena to face the Phoenix Mercury, with Caitlin Clark in the starting lineup. It didn't feel like a regular season game. It felt like a cultural collision disguised as basketball. The cameras were already rolling, every network scrambling to capture what they were now calling the generational showdown. The noise inside the building was a living thing, shaking, rising, pulsing a level of anticipation the WNBA had rarely experienced on a Tuesday night. For weeks, fans had circled this matchup on their calendars. For months, Diana Taurasi had made it clear that the path to greatness demanded a gauntlet. And for Caitlin Clark, that gauntlet arrived early. From the opening tip, it was obvious the court itself had become a pressure cooker. Every dribble Caitlin took Drew gasps. Every cut Diana made Drew murmurs. People weren't just watching basketball. They were watching the tectonic plates of the league shift under their feet. Caitlin's new fans, millions of them loud, diverse, and fiercely protective, showed up with homemade signs and unshakable conviction. Meanwhile, Taurasi loyalists, the old guard who'd been watching her dominate for decades, filled the opposite side with that familiar swagger. Respect the throne. Caitlin opened the game with a rhythm dribble just inside half court. As Diana sagged back, surveying the rookie with the calm of a woman who had seen and crushed hundreds before her, Caitlin lifted the ball. The release was effortless. The shot traveled through the air with the confidence of someone born under stadium lights. When it swished, the crowd erupted as if witnessing history in real time. Because they were. Then came the possessions that made it clear this wasn't luck. Caitlin controlled the pace with the same icy poise she'd shown in college. She dissected Phoenix's defense with quick reads, sharp cross-court passes, and that signature pull-up three that seemed to defy every scouting report. Her stat line began stacking early. Threes from the logo, pocket passes to cutting teammates, a transition dime that curved like it had GPS programmed into it. She wasn't just surviving the moment. She was bending it. And that's when the camera caught Diana's expression change. The veteran who had built her career on intimidation, talent, and a don't blink or I'll bury you aura suddenly looked unsettled. Not defeated, not overwhelmed, but undeniably rattled in a way fans almost never witnessed. Every time Caitlin hit another impossible shot, the roar of the crowd swallowed the arena whole. Pressing down like a wave Diana wasn't used to swimming against. The message in the air was unspoken but thick. The league was evolving faster than anyone expected. Still, Taurasi fought back. She scored on crafty post-ups, hit her trademark fadeaway, barked at the refs with vintage fire. And for a few moments, the game morphed into a duel. Two eras refusing to go quietly. The broadcast replayed their reactions after every possession, fueling a narrative the league didn't intend but couldn't escape. the legend versus the phenomenon. By the fourth quarter, the atmosphere had reached a new level of electric. Ratings surged. Social media exploded. Clips of Caitlin threading passes and pulling from deep circulated in real time, ricocheting across group chats and timelines around the world. And in the arena, the fever pitch felt like a cultural awakening. Young girls in jerseys screamed every time the ball touched Caitlin's hands. Immigrant families who'd never watched a WNBA game before found themselves standing, cheering, claiming a new hero. It was more than basketball. It was belonging, and through it all, Caitlin stayed composed. No taunting, no theatrics, just the quiet, relentless work of someone who knew she belonged. The poise that carried her through college now carried her through the storm of national attention, veteran hostility, and a spotlight hot enough to melt most rookies. Her silence, once seen as politeness, now looked like strategy, a weapon. The final minutes were a blur of highlight plays and rising tension. Diana pushed, clawed, demanded the moment bend back toward her. But each time she surged, Caitlin answered, not with noise but with precision. A deep three over a late closeout. A slick bounce pass through traffic. A fearless drive finishing high off the glass. The shift was undeniable. The crowd could feel it. The broadcasters whispered it. And even Diana, breathing hard, staring at the scoreboard, understood it. This wasn't just a meeting of eras anymore. It was a takeover in slow motion. And yet, the biggest shock of all hadn't arrived. Because nothing prepared Diana, nothing prepared anyone. For the night the torch wasn't passed, it was taken. The night the Phoenix Mercury hosted the Fever in what fans worldwide were calling the unofficial passing of the torch. The arena looked less like a basketball venue and more like a pressure chamber ready to detonate. Every seat was filled. Every camera pointed at one person. And shockingly, it wasn't the woman who had dominated the league for 2 decades. From warm-ups to introductions, it was clear. Caitlin Clark was a gravitational force pulling the entire WNBA universe into her orbit. Even the way she jogged through her layup line had a quiet electricity that made the entire building lean forward, waiting for something they couldn't quite predict but desperately wanted to witness. Diana Taurasi watched her for the opposite end, jaws set, shoulders tight, fully aware the night felt different. The game opened with a tension so thick the commentators could barely keep up. Phoenix needed a win. Diana Taurasi needed a statement. And Caitlin? She needed nothing. Her game had become the purest form of defiance. Quiet, surgical, devastating. When she stepped into her first three, a full stride behind the arc, the ball left her hands with that unmistakable Clark confidence. It swished clean, slicing through the noise and resetting the tone of the night. The Mercury fans gasped. Fever fans roared. And Diana, running back on defense, wore a strained half-smile that didn't quite hide the pressure crawling up her spine. Every possession after that became a highlight, real waiting to happen. Caitlin navigated screens with ballerina precision, reading defenders like a seasoned veteran, while carrying the demeanor of someone who still couldn't believe people waited in lines just to watch her warm up. She hit a leaning floater over a double team. She drained another deep three off a broken play. She found her teammates with passes so sharp they felt personal. And through it all, she said nothing. No stare-downs, no smirks, no gestures. Just pure basketball, the kind that makes silence louder than trash talk ever could. Meanwhile, Diana Taurasi tried to anchor her team through the storm, but the storm kept coming. Caitlin forced Phoenix into mismatches, exposed slow rotations, and punished every inch of space they gave her. And when Diana subbed out midway through the second quarter, the crowd did something unthinkable. They applauded louder for Caitlin's substitution than for their own legend checking in or out of the game. For the first time in years, the Phoenix crowd was falling in love with someone not wearing their colors, a seismic shift Diana could feel in her bones. The broadcast felt the change too. Every replay centered on Caitlin. Every graphic featured her stat line. Every highlight package bent toward her impact. When Diana hit a jumper, it was a footnote. When Caitlin hit one, it became a chapter. The league couldn't hide what was happening. It didn't even try. This was the new face of the WNBA, and everyone, from executives to fans to casual viewers whose algorithms suddenly delivered them a fever game, felt the pivot in real time. By halftime, social media had erupted into a frenzy that made the arena feel even smaller. Clips of Caitlyn's Logo 3 had already crossed 1 million views. Comment sections glowed with global praise. Kids were reenacting her shots in living rooms. Even celebrities chimed in, posting reactions that boosted the broadcast numbers into the stratosphere. And through all of it, Caitlyn stayed centered. No celebration beyond a nod. No extra emotion. Just the calm of someone who understood the magnitude without ever needing to say it. The second half was where the game transformed into folklore. Phoenix tried everything. Traps, switches, high-impact screens meant to wear her down. But Caitlyn adapted like she was rewriting the rules in real time. When they trapped her, she split them. When they pushed her off her spots, she pulled up from deeper. When they tried out physical her, she answered with poise so unshakable it almost felt disrespectful. And then came the shot that broke the arena open. A step-back 3 from the left wing with Diana closing out, her hand fully extended. The shot arced high, kissed the air, and dropped through without touching the rim. And that was the moment Diana got benched again. The cameras didn't follow her to the sideline. They stayed with Caitlyn, capturing her steady breathing, the way she tapped her chest twice, then pointed to her teammate as if to redirect the attention. But the attention didn't move. It couldn't. The lead had found its North Star. From the bench, Diana watched as her crowd, cheered for a rookie dismantling her team. She watched the broadcasters rave about Caitlyn's efficiency. She watched the camera zoom in on every smile Caitlyn shared with her teammates. For the first time in her long, storied career, Diana wasn't a moment. She was a witness to someone else's rise. The closing minutes cemented the narrative. Caitlyn orchestrated the offense like a maestro, finding cutters with impossible angles and sinking daggers from distances that once would have been considered showboating. Her teammates fed off the energy, their confidence blooming with every possession she guided. And when the Fever secured the win with a final defensive stop, the bench cleared in celebration. Caitlyn didn't shout. She didn't gesture toward the cameras. She simply embraced her teammates with that signature humility, her smile bright, but measured. It was the ultimate mic drop without sound, an entire arena watching the beginning of a new era, without the heroine needing a single word. And just a few feet away, Diana Taurasi stood still, hands on her hips, eyes locked on the rookie who had just stolen the spotlight she once controlled with ease. She didn't need anyone to say it aloud. She could feel it. The torch wasn't passed tonight. It was taken. As the crowd filed out, the buzz didn't fade. Conversations echoed to the concourses about her shooting, her calm, the way she carried herself like someone made for moments bigger than any spotlight. Parents pointed her out to their kids as the example of a new kind of greatness, one built on skill and silence rather than bravado. The ushers whispered that she felt different. But what happened next behind the scenes was a moment that ended everything. The morning after the Fever left Phoenix, buzzing with a new kind of electricity, the Mercury front office gathered in a boardroom that felt more like a truth chamber. No cameras, no reporters, no Diana. Just executives staring at hard numbers that didn't bother to lie. Attendance had hit season highs not when Phoenix dominated, not when Diana hit another milestone, but when Caitlyn Clark walked into town with her calm confidence and global fan base. The spreadsheet showed it in ruthless detail. Ticket sales spiked for her games. Merch tables overflowed when she was in the building. Social engagement went nuclear every time she touched the ball. Meanwhile, the Mercury's own metrics looked like they were holding their breath, waiting for permission to decline. And for the first time in 20 years, the organization opened its eyes to a future that didn't revolve around its longest-standing star. That was the moment everything shifted. Within weeks, Phoenix announced a full-scale rebuild that sounded more like a corporate takeover than a basketball makeover. A new general manager with a reputation for cutting through nostalgia like a knife. A new head coach known for player development analytics and a kind of modern basketball philosophy that made old-school veterans uncomfortable. Even the practice facility got an overhaul, with tech-driven systems replacing the dusty routines that had carried Diana through her prime. The message was subtle but sharp. Phoenix wasn't polishing the past anymore. It was chasing the future with both hands. And that future, everyone knew, looked a lot like Caitlin Clark. The Mercury's marketing team leaned in immediately. Their campaign shifted tone, suddenly filled with energetic youthful branding, vibrant color schemes, and slogans about new eras, fresh energy, and rising identities. They pushed the team as a reimagined force ready to compete in a league transformed by next-gen stars. Even worse, the fans responded. Ticket packages sold better when Phoenix teased matchups with rising rookies across the league. Social channels gained traction whenever they posted highlights of younger players. The city wasn't rejecting Diana. It was simply hungry for something the next generation offered with ease, momentum. But nothing spoke louder than the numbers from the Caitlin Clark effect. Local businesses near the arena reported some of their best nights in years on the evenings she came to town. ESPN hit rating milestones. The team store ordered extra merch racks because her presence created foot traffic that dwarfed even Diana's jersey retirement ceremonies. Phoenix was forced to admit the unthinkable. A player from another franchise was doing more for their economy than their own legend. Internally, the whispers grew louder. Some staffers asked whether Diana could adjust to the speed of the modern game. Others wondered privately if the team's culture was too anchored to her old leadership style. But one question, quiet, dangerous, and entirely unavoidable, echoed through every meeting. Do we have our own Caitlin Clark? The subtext was even sharper. If not, how we get one? The rebuild became more aggressive. Phoenix invested heavily in scouting. They courted young free agents, drafted players with long-term upside over short-term reliability, and even hinted at a willingness to trade veteran pieces to secure youth. Suddenly, the franchise that had once marketed itself around toughness and experience was selling optimism, potential, and the promise of a new identity. Diana, meanwhile, was still giving everything she had, still pushing her body through training sessions, still holding on to the habits that made her one of the greatest. But every day, the ground beneath her shifted a bit more. Her supporters noticed it first. Camera crews no longer swarmed her post-game interviews. The broadcast didn't frame her as the center of Phoenix's identity anymore. Even during games, the energy in the arena changed. Fans still loved her, but they weren't building their season around her. They were waiting for whatever the next era brought. And the organization encouraged them to. Then came the cruelest truth of all. When Phoenix released its season promotional materials, Diana's image, which once dominated billboards, was smaller, tucked between rising players. The marketing team insisted it was part of a balanced push, but insiders knew what it really was, a soft transition toward a future Diana wouldn't fully belong to. Her name still carried weight, but the league had evolved, and its heartbeat came from someone else now. Even national analysts framed Phoenix's rebuild in pointed terms. This is a team preparing for the next generation. They set on morning shows. They want dynamic guards, modern spacing, three-level scorers. They want someone who can fill seats the way Caitlin does. They're chasing their own version of her. And as the debates raged online, fans noticed something telling. No one mentioned Diana when they talked about the Mercury's long-term picture. The realization hit her during a late practice, long after reporters had gone home. She watched the young players learn new spacing schemes built around speed she couldn't replicate anymore. The coaches spoke in tones aimed at the future, not the present. And for the first time in her career, Diana Taurasi felt something she had never allowed to creep into her mind before: distance. Not age, not decline, but distance from the center of a franchise she once carried like a crown. She stood at half court, bouncing the ball slowly, absorbing the truth that had been forming all season. It wasn't personal. It wasn't cruel. It was simply the reality of basketball in a world where Caitlin Clark existed. And that's when Diana finally understood her reality had arrived. The truth didn't hit Diana all at once. It arrived slowly, like a cold draft seeping in through a door she never noticed was cracked open. First came the reduced minutes. Subtle at the start, sprinkled with excuses about preserving her body and testing new rotations. She nodded, playing along, because legends don't question coaches in public. But deep down, she recognized the shift. Every time she sat longer than she should have, every time a timeout ended without her name being called, A quiet sting spread through her chest. Not enough to break her, just enough to warn her. Then came the conversations, sharp in tone and soft in purpose, the kind that leave marks without ever raising a voice. The new GM spoke about organizational direction with the icy poise of someone who knew exactly what they were doing and had rehearsed the lines in the mirror. The new coach praised Diana's leadership while simultaneously outlining schemes built around pace and youth. They smiled often, but they did not look her in the eye, and that told her everything. In the locker room, the energy had changed too. Younger players whispered about opportunity, about new roles opening up, about becoming the face of a franchise in transition. Diana didn't blame them. They were hungry, ambitious, ready to carve out their own legacies. But she could feel the subtle distancing, the way they hesitated before asking her for advice, the way they glanced toward the coaching staff for cues. She was still respected, but she wasn't central anymore. She wasn't the gravitational pull. The new era didn't orbit her. Even the fans, loyal as they'd been, were evolving with the league. They still wore her jersey, still chanted her name, still honored her every milestone. But the volume wasn't the same. Not because they loved her less, but because they had more to love now, new stars, new stories, new hope. And she could see it in their faces. Admiration mixed with anticipation for what Phoenix would look like without her shadow stretching across the court. As the season wore on, the emotional toll deepened. Diana found herself analyzing every detail. The number of plays drawn up for her, the number of post-game questions directed toward younger players, the way cameras seemed magnetically drawn to anyone under 25. She once commanded the spotlight by simply existing. Now the spotlight floated freely, searching for the new story the league was desperate to tell. The final blow came in a meeting that lasted 23 minutes but felt like a lifetime. The GM leaned forward, hands clasped, voice steady, offering something that sounded like respect but tasted like closure. "We want to honor your legacy," he said. "And we also have to plan for the future." Diana didn't interrupt. She didn't break. She let him speak, let him spin the corporate poetry that disguises a decision already made weeks before. Reduced role, limited minutes, leadership presence more than on-court force. It was a polite invitation to fade away gracefully. But Diana Taurasi never did anything gracefully. She walked out of that meeting with the heaviness of someone carrying 2 decades of battles, breakthroughs, and bruises. She sat in her car for a long time afterward, staring at the steering wheel, letting the reality settle like dust around her. It wasn't injury. It wasn't age. It wasn't even the loss of athletic advantage. It was the one opponent no champion can outrun: evolution. The league had changed. The pace, the style, the marketing machine, the cultural moment, they all marched forward with or without her. Caitlin Clark's rise wasn't just a phenomenon. It was a signal flare marking the beginning of a new era, an era built for a different type of star. And deep down, Diana understood that staying another season, accepting a bench role, letting her final chapter be written by someone else, would hurt more than leaving on her own terms. So the decision, painful, heavy, heartbreaking, began forming in her mind. Retirement, not as surrender, but as strategy, as dignity, as the final act of control in a world she no longer commanded. Better walk away a legend than to return as a diminished memory of one. She saw it clearly. Her farewell wasn't defeat. It was an evolution of its own, a transition from greatness on the court to greatness remembered. And yet, as the thought crystallized, she felt something else rising in its shadow. A truth bigger than her story, bigger than her career, bigger than her legacy. Because this story isn't just about a legend falling. It's about something bigger rising in her place. Years from now, when fans look back at the era that shaped women's basketball, Diana Taurasi's name will still tower like a monument. She was greatness in its purest form. The killer instinct, the impossible shots, the swagger that carried a league long before the cameras cared. But history isn't just built on highlights. It's built on humanity. And that's where her legacy begins to blur. Because Diana didn't just dominate the court. She dominated the conversation. She set the tone. She set the standard. And when the next generation arrived, she tried to set the ceiling too. Her refusal to embrace Caitlin Clark wasn't just a critique. It was a warning. It was a line drawn in the sand by someone who had always won, suddenly confronted by someone who didn't need her approval to shine. Meanwhile, Caitlin rose without ever raising her voice. While Diana cast shadows, Caitlin brought light. While Diana questioned her, Caitlin kept working. And while Diana clung to the past, Caitlin carried the future with a calmness that felt revolutionary. The contrast became the story. One legend speaking loudly, one rookie speaking only through brilliance. So, what will history remember? Will Diana be immortalized as a GOAT who defined an era, or the gatekeeper who couldn't let the next one thrive? Will fans see her as the icon who built the league, or the veteran who bristled when the league finally outgrew her? Those answers won't be written by reporters or highlight reels. They'll be written by time, and by the millions who watch this clash of eras unfold. Because in sports, in culture, in every movement that demands progress, one truth always rises above the noise. The future doesn't wait for permission. It arrives.